indigenous people of the Philippines have diverse belief systems and spiritual practices that vary across different ethnic groups. Here are some common aspects found among various indigenous communities. First is animism. Many indigenous Filipino groups practice animism, which involves the belief in the presence of spirits or supernatural beings in nature, such as mountains, rivers, trees, and animals. The second is ancestor worship. Ancestor worship is a significant aspect of indigenous Filipino belief system. They believe that the spirits of their ancestors continue to influence their lives. And the third is elemental spirits. There is often a belief in elemental spirits, including spirits associated with earth, water, fire, and air. These spirits are believed to have specific roles and powers. Indigenous Filipinos have deep respect for the environment and often consider it sacred. They believe that the nature provides for their needs and sustains their communities. Divination and healing. Traditional healers or shamans are important figures in indigenous communities. They use various methods such as herbal medicine and rituals for healing and divination. Taboos and prohibitions. Indigenous communities often have taboos or rules related to specific places, objects, or activities. These are meant to maintain harmony with the natural and spiritual realms. And last is mythology and oral tradition. Myths and oral stories are used to explain the origins of the world, natural phenomena, and the relationships between humans and spiritual realm. It's important to note that there are over 100 different indigenous groups in the Philippines, each with its own unique beliefs and practices. Therefore, there are rich diversity of belief systems within indigenous communities of the Philippines. The indigenous people of the Philippines have long history of resistance and revolts against colonial powers and oppressive regimes. Here are some notable examples. First is the Gohi Rebellion, 1744 to 1829. This is one of the longest running revolts in Philippine history, led by Francisco de Gojoy, a Boholano chieftain. It was sparked by abuses and injustices committed by Spanish authorities. The rebellion lasted for 85 years. Tamblot Uprising, 1621 to 1622, led by Tamblot, a Boholano Babaylan indigenous priest. This revolt was a response to forced labor conversion to Christianity and other oppressive Spanish policies. Palaris Revolt, 1762 to 1765. This revolt was led by Juan de la Cruz Palaris, an indigenous leader from Pangasinan. It opposed Spanish abuses and exactions. Dato Lapu-Lapu and the Battle of Mactan, 1521. Although not a sustained rebellion, Dato Lapu-Lapu's resistance against the invading Spanish forces led by Ferdinand Magellan is a significant event in the history. Lapu-Lapu and his warriors successfully repelled the Spanish expedition. Cordillera Uprising, Igorot Revolts. Various uprisings occurred in the Cordillera region against Spanish and later American colonial rule. Notable revolts include the Bantok Revolt, 1900, and the Kalinga Uprising, 1927. Manobo Revolt, 1650s, led by Dato Pagubaya, a Manobo leader from Mindanao. This rebellion opposed forced labor and tribute imposed by Spanish. These revolts and resistance movements were often rooted in grievances over forced labor, oppressive taxation, land disposition, religious coercion, and other forms of colonial exploitation. They reflect the indigenous peoples determined to protect their way of life, culture, and autonomy.
My topic is about indigenous languages and scripts in the Philippines. Indigenous languages. The Philippines is home to numerous indigenous languages spoken by various ethnic groups such as Tagalog, Cebuano, Ilocano, and many more. And the Libata is an older form for Baybayin, and it is sometimes used to refer to the script as well. And for the scripts, there are many scripts in the Philippines. So the first one I chose is the Mangyan script. It is from Mindoro Island, and this script is used for writing their indigenous languages. It is known as the Mangyan script. The Kalinga script from the people in the northern Philippines, which is used for writing the Kalinga language.
Traditional art is part of a culture of group of people, skills, and knowledge which are passed down through generations from master craftsmen to apprentice. So, traditional arts and craft in the Philippines include basket and cloth weaving, jewelry making, pottery, wood carving, and tattoos. So, first, cloth weaving. This one of the most precious living traditions that are still kept until today is weaving. Originating in the pre-colonial times, the art of the art of weaving of the Cordillera tribes of the north is still existing despite the threat of threat of the more practical mass productions of cloth. So the natives use backstrap loom to produce blankets and articles of clothing. Pinya cloth is also produced in looms throughout the province of Antique. It is a delicate and exquisite hand-woven cloth that is made from the fibers, which can get in the leaves of pineapple plants. It is popular use in Barong Tagalog or traditional clothes. So having its organic and erotic style, it is becoming more popular now around the world. Abaca fiber come from the abaca plant that is endemic and grown in the country. It is woven chiefly to make cinnamon fabric. Abaca is popular in the making of rope, specialty papers like vacuum bags, currency, and tea bags. There are also handcrafts like bags, furniture, carpets, and clothing made of abaca. So next is basket weaving. So baskets are mainly used by the Cordilleras for their occupation. They use them as storage for the food when they need to go to mountain terraces or cultivate their lands. Uh, Basket is needed for carrying grains, hunting animals, and fishing in the streams. Baskets made of bamboo became their first traps. The shape, the shape and the size of baskets are according of the kind of fish they want to catch. No, next is jewelry making. Since the early 16th century, jewelry making in the country has been in existence. It is believed that the skill of our early Filipino in making jewelry are adapted from their Asian neighbors like the Chinese. So jewelry making is a source of livelihood for the family, and it is traditionally a home-based industry. The government give their support and attention in the industry. By this support, the country became the top producer of gold. Yes, the fourth is pottery. Pots in the Philippines have different sizes, shapes, and designs. Their their designs are usually geometric with stylish nature motifs. So pottery become more functional as the time passed by. An example of this is palayok, which is used for cooking. So banga and tapayan are used for storing liquids. Now, there is also the clay-made stove or kalan. The making of Borneo pottery in Ilocosur is still lively traditions that continues up to the present. Now, wood carving. So, Philippine sculpture is the most familiar art among the Filipinos. The most popular wood carving in the Philippines are carvings of the Anitos or nature gods, santos or saints, and statues of Christ and the Blessed Mother. Philippine culture have undergone changes in terms of shape, size, and the medium used. So lastly, tattoos. So Filipino tattoos have a rich history dating back to before the Philippine Islands were colonized by Spaniards. When Spanish ships first arrived, they were greeted by the heavily tattooed Bisaya tribe, and they called the islands La Isla de los Pintados, so which means the island of the painted ones. So, in the Philippines, tattoos were seen as a source of accomplishments and rank. Men bore ink on their chests and heads, a sign of their strength as warriors. Women's were Women were detailed lines on their arms and wrists. Visayas, Mindanao tribes, or Fulchis, armed tattoos in Luzon Mountain Province, and they were seen as marks of beauty. So most tattoos were earned through the passage of rites ceremonies or for accomplishing tasks. The style varied depending on the region and tribe that the people came from. So that's all.
Rituals and economics are two words are often confused when it comes to the understanding of their meaning and connotations. A ritual refers to a group of actions performed for their symbolic value. On the other hand, a ceremony is a performed of a special occasions. They held ceremonies to pray for success in hunting, fertility, and good weather for the harvest. The rituals give them structure in a world they can't comprehend. However, in our day and age, ceremony and rituals have become less and less important in a time where everything seems to be expendable by science. The magic of ceremony has been forward upon and displaced to religions, institutions, or native tributes. Exclusively, rituals are an important aspect of religions because they allow beliefs to express and real reframe their belief system. One of the primary purpose of ritual is communications. Ritual communicate or are intended to communicate to self, others, or deities.
Pre-colonial societies. Pre-colonial societies refer to diverse cultures, civilization, and communities that extend before European colonization of various regions around the world. These societies had their own equal of social, political, economic, and culture system. They often include indigenous peoples, empire and kingdoms, and tribal communities. Example of pre-colonial societies include Aztec Empire and Inca Empire.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, classmates. I am Dagurayan Jasper Karl, and from Group 3. My part is to report about colonial impact and cultural assimilation. Colonialism has left an enduring mark on the world, and one of its most profound impacts has been process in cultural assimilation. This report explores the consequences and challenges associated with the cultural assimilation resulting from colonial rule. The colonial impact are cultural disruption, economic exploitation, loss of autonomy. The cultural disruption, colonial powers disrupted indigenous cultures by imposing their languages, religion, and value system, often through force. Second, economic exploitation.
Colonizers extracted resources from colonized region, leading to economic dependency and cultural upheaval. 3. Loss of autonomy. Indigenous governance structures were dismantled, eroding local autonomy and self-determination. We have is cultural assimilation. Is have part of 3. Language suppression, religious conversion. 3rd is westernization. First, we have to talk about language suppression. It is native languages were suppressed or replaced, leading to the loss of linguistic diversity and cultural identity. Second, religion conversion. Indigenous belief type systems were often replaced by the colonizers' religions, eroding traditional spiritual practices. Third, westernization. Western dress, education, and social norms were imposed, leading to a shift away from indigenous costumes and traditions. The challenges: cultural erosion, identity crisis, intergenerational trauma. Cultural erosion is assimilation resulted in a erosion of indigenous languages, traditions, and acknowledged systems, threatening cultural diversity. Second, identity crisis. Many communities struggle with identity crisis as they navigate to the tension between traditional and colonial influences. Third, intergenerational trauma. The effects of colonialism and assimilation continue to impact subsequent generations, causing trauma and social challenges. The colonial impact on cultural assimilation have left deep scars on indigenous communities worldwide. Recognizing and addressing these challenges requires efforts to preserve and revitalize indigenous cultures, language, and traditions while acknowledging the historical injustice perpetrated during the colonial era. Cultural preservation initiatives are essential steps toward healing and rebuilding cultural resilience. That's all.
Hi, my name is Sidney Miro, and I'm here to talk about ancestral domain and land tenure system. Ancestral domain refers to the land, territories, and resources traditionally owned, occupied, or used by indigenous communities. In the Philippines, the Indigenous Political Rights Act, or the IPRA, of 1997 recognizes and protects the ancestral domains of indigenous groups. This law grants the indigenous communities the right to manage and govern these areas. The Certificate of Ancestral Domain title, or the CADT, states that indigenous communities can secure a CADT through a formal process outlined in IPRA. This document provides legal recognition of their ancestral domain, giving them control over its management and use. Land tenure system. Indigenous communities in the Philippines often have distinct land tenure systems that differ from mainstream property concepts. These systems are often communal, where land is collectively owned and managed by the community. The concept of individual land ownership may not apply. Customary laws. Indigenous groups in the Philippines have their customary laws and traditions governing land use, inheritance, and resource management. These customary laws are recognized and respected under IPRA and play a vital role in preserving their cultural heritage and sustainable land practices. Protection of indigenous rights. IPRA also safeguards the right of indigenous people to participate in decision-making processes concerning their ancestral domain. It ensures that the rights are protected from external encroachments such as mining and logging activities. Challenge and conflicts. Despite legal protections, Indigenous communities often face challenges, including land conflicts with government agencies or private corporations seeking to exploit natural resources within their ancestral domains. These conflicts highlight the ongoing struggle to uphold the indigenous land rights. Collaboration and conservation. Many indigenous communities in the Philippines play a significant role in environmental conservation. As the traditional practices often prioritize sustainable land use and preservation of biodiversity. Overall, ancestral domain and land tenure systems for indigenous people in the Philippines are essential components of their identity, culture, and self-determination, and that they also face ongoing challenges in protecting these rights and their natural resources. The Philippine indigenous environment. Here are the three specific The Philippine indigenous environment. Here are the three specific examples of environmental stewardship and sustainability practices of the indigenous people of the Philippines. The Sweden agriculture, or the kaingin. Many indigenous groups in the Philippines practicing Sweden agriculture, also known as kaingin, or shifting cultivation. They clear small patches of forest, cultivate crops for a few years, and then allow the land to regenerate while they move to another area. This method reduces the pressure on a single piece of land, promoting biodiversity and soil health. The second one is the traditional forest management. Indigenous communities often have traditional systems of forest management that involve rules and practices to sustainably harvest timber, non-timber forest products, and protect sacred areas. These systems help preserve forests for future generations and maintain ecological balance. Custom marine tenure. In coastal areas, indigenous groups implement customary marine tenure systems, designate specific fishing grounds, regulate fishing activities, and enforce rules to protect marine resources. These practices ensure that long-term sustainability of fisheries and marine ecosystems. These examples demonstrate how indigenous communities in the Philippines have been practicing sustainable and environmentally friendly methods for generations, contributing to the conservation of their manual surroundings. That's all. Thank you.
Challenges in land disputes and exploitation. Land disputes and exploitation are invasive issues worldwide, with significant social, economic, and environmental implications. This report highlights key challenges associated with these problems. So, challenges in land disputes. Number 1, property rights ambiguity. Ambiguous land tenure systems and property rights often lead to conflict over land ownerships and usage. Number 2, rapid urbanization. Urban expansion encroaches on rural lands, triggering disputes and displacing vulnerable communities. Number 3, historical injustices. Past injustices such as land theft or colonizations continue to fuel disputes and grievances. Number 4, weak legal frameworks. Inadequate legal systems and enforcement mechanisms hinder the resolutions of land disputes. Here are the challenges in land exploitation. Number 1, unsustainable practices. Unsustainable land use practices such as deforestation and overgrazing degrade ecosystems and threaten biodiversity. Number 2, resource extraction. Exploitation of natural resources including minerals and fossil fuels often occurs at the expense of land and environmental degradation. Number 3, indigenous rights. Indigenous communities are disproportionately affected by land exploitation, often without their consent or adequate compensation. Number 4, climate change. Land exploitation contributes to climate change through activities like deforestation, exacerbating global environmental challenges. Addressing land disputes and exploitation necessitates comprehensive solutions including improved land governance, sustainable land management practices, recognition of indigenous rights, and efforts to mitigate the environmental impacts. Resolving these challenges is crucial for equitable and sustainable land use and the protection of ecosystems and vulnerable communities. Indigenous ecological knowledge. Indigenous ecological knowledge represents the profound understanding of the environment, ecosystems, and biodiversity held by indigenous communities around the world. This knowledge is derived from centuries of living in close connection with the natural world and is a valuable resource for sustainable resource management and conservation efforts. This report explores the significance, key aspects, and challenges associated with indigenous ecological knowledge. So, sustainable resource management. Indigenous communities have developed sustainable practices for hunting, fishing, agriculture, and forestry that maintain ecological balance and prevent resource depletion. Biodiversity conservation. Indigenous ecological knowledge plays a crucial role in preserving biodiversity by identifying and protecting critical habitats and species. Climate adaptation. Indigenous peoples often possess knowledge about climate patterns, allowing them to adapt to changing conditions and contribute to climate resilience efforts. Here are the key aspects of indigenous ecological knowledge. Holistic perspective. It considers the interconnectedness of all living beings and ecosystems, emphasizing the importance of balance and harmony. Oral tradition. Much of this knowledge is passed down through oral tradition from one generation to the next, maintaining cultural heritage. Observation and experience. Indigenous knowledge is based on direct observations and experiences in the natural environment. Ethical principles. It often includes ethical guidelines for responsible interaction with nature, promoting sustainable practices. Indigenous ecological knowledge is a rich and valuable resource for promoting sustainable environmental practices, conserving biodiversity, and adapting to changing climate conditions. It represents a holistic and time-tested approach to understand and living in harmony with the natural world. Recognizing, respecting, and incorporating ecological knowledge into environmental management and conservation efforts is essential for a more sustainable and resilient future.